I was 3 shots deep when the sky tore open. I'm not proud of it, but that's where I was, half drowning in whiskey at a dive bar on the edge of New Chicago's Undercity. The kind of place where hope goes to die slow and miserable. The neon signs buzzed outside the grimy windows, flickering in sync with my shattered thoughts. My fingers drummed against the scarred wooden bar, tracing invisible patterns like a metronome for the ghosts of my past. Most nights, I'd be alone. Tonight, I had a couple of drunks for company, laughing at jokes they'd heard too many times and telling stories that didn't make sense anymore. I tuned it all out, focusing on the amber liquid in my glass. My only honest friend these days. Then the sky screamed. It started as a low hum, like a distant engine revving up in some celestial garage. Then, almost instantly, it roared into a deafening crack that shook the city to its foundation. The neon signs shattered into sparkling rain, the windows cracked, and people spilled into the streets, staring upward with wide eyes and trembling lips. A fiery tear ripped across the clouds. It wasn't lightning, not any lightning I'd ever seen. It was something alive, a jagged slash of blinding light, boiling energy that sizzled in the atmosphere. Then came the ships, big, black, obsidian, ships that looked like nightmares spat out by a mad god. Their hulls shimmered with a cold sheen that swallowed light whole. They moved with terrible purpose, silent except for the eerie vibrations crawling under our skin. The world stopped. I should have been running, screaming, anything, but I was frozen, glass halfway to my lips, staring like a fool. The bar fell quiet, all eyes glued to the sky as if it held the last page of the world's story. The news had told us for years. Earth wasn't welcome anymore. The Galactic Concord had closed their borders. Their doors slammed shut in our faces a decade ago. Too violent, too chaotic, too primitive. Their words were etched into history alongside the treaties we never signed, the alliances we never got. But they were back, and they weren't here to negotiate. A broadcast suddenly cut through every screen, every device, crisp, cold, official. The Concord's emblem blinked on monitors across the globe. The message was short, no preamble, no apologies. Earth must prepare to join the defense. The enemy has returned. The enemy. Just hearing the word felt like swallowing shards of glass. It wasn't a fairy tale or a bedtime story we told kids to keep them scared. This enemy had haunted the Concord for centuries. Whole civilizations vanished before their shadows. Planets reduced to cinders. Nothing left but the silence where stars once shone. And now, it was coming for us. The bar erupted into chaos. People grabbed their loved ones, rushed outside, or dropped to their knees. But I stayed. I couldn't move. Not yet. Because I wasn't just some drunk with nothing left to lose. I was Rin Calder, ex-Marine, war veteran, and a man who knew exactly what was coming next. Because I'd seen the face of war up close, and it hadn't forgotten me. My memories came rushing back, unbidden and sharp as knives. I remembered the last time I fought. Not the flashbulb glory moments everyone imagined. The real fight, the trenches, the blood, the fear that made your heart pound like a drumbeat in a death march. I'd been younger then, full of fire and fury. The kind of fire that burns bright but consumes everything it touches. That war, the one that cost me everything, had been humanity's last desperate stand on a dying frontier world. The rest of the galaxy had their wars too, but none like ours. We fought like wild animals, not soldiers. Guerrilla tactics, savage raids, ambushes in the acid rain. No mercy, no pause. I lost my squad that day, the day they called the battle at Epsilon Prime the bloodbath. I lost my arm, my honor, and my place in a society that had already written me off. And now, the sky screamed the same war was coming back. The streets filled with sirens and shouting. Military drones lifted off, scanning the black ships like moths circling a flame. The government, what was left of it, issued emergency orders, evacuation protocols, and martial law. But their words sounded hollow, like promises whispered in a hurricane. I stumbled out of the bar, swallowing the last of my drink. The city was on fire, not just from the panic, but from something deeper. A primal fear buried in our DNA. We were not ready. None of us were. I pulled my coat tighter around me and headed toward the old military barracks on the city's outskirts. They'd have orders there. They had to. Inside the barracks, everything was chaos wrapped in cold efficiency. Soldiers I once served with were moving like ghosts, faces harder, eyes sharper. The buzz of encrypted radios filled the air, mixing with the low murmur of commanders debating strategies. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not anymore. My dishonorable discharge meant I was a civilian, a liability. But when word came that the Concorde was requesting my presence, the old wounds flared to life. I was summoned, not by Earth's generals, not by the UN, but by the Concorde themselves. An alien delegation landed near the city center, sleek ships that gleamed with technologies so advanced they made our scrapped equipment look like children's toys. They didn't come with fanfare or diplomacy. They came with cold, hard necessity. Their envoy was tall and imposing, features sharp, skin shimmering faintly under the city lights. The kind of presence that demanded respect, even when you hated them for it. "You are Rin Calder," the envoy said, voice metallic, emotionless. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "They require your assistance." That was the moment everything changed. The world I'd sunk into, the haze of regret and lost purpose, shattered. The sky screamed for blood and fire, and I was being dragged back into the fight. Not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a weapon forged in the fires of Earth's brutal history. Because the Concorde had seen something in us, something terrifying, something wild, something they feared and needed in equal measure. They thought we were monsters. They were right. I looked up at the stars that night, the same stars that had mocked us from beyond the void, and I whispered a promise to myself. If the universe wanted war, then I would give it hell. They didn't come for my cooperation. They came for my destruction. At least, that's what it felt like at first. The Concorde delegation wasn't interested in pleasantries or introductions. No invitations, no handshakes, just a cold demand. "Rin Calder, report immediately for extraction." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I stood in the ruins of my old life, a crumbling apartment in the lower sectors, surrounded by faded posters of a world that no longer cared. The only company I kept was the gnawing weight of my past mistakes and the scars carved deep into my skin and soul. When they arrived, it was in the dead of night. The air grew heavy, the hum of their ships vibrating through the concrete like a warning drum. I heard the knock on my door, sharp, deliberate, a sound that froze my blood. "Rin Calder." The voice was unmistakably alien, smooth, precise, with a metallic edge that made your teeth grind. "You are required aboard the Calypso's Lament." I opened the door to three figures, tall, angular, clad in armor that shifted colors with every movement. Their faces were sharp, but their eyes told a story of cold calculation mixed with a flicker of fear. "Why me?" I asked, my voice rough like gravel. The tallest one stepped forward. "Because you were what we feared, the one we called the monster." That word hit me like a slap. Monster. It wasn't a name I gave myself, but it was the one everyone else used. The military brass, the politicians, the people who wanted heroes but only got soldiers to blame. I was a monster because I survived when others didn't, because I fought dirty, because I did things no one else dared. I wanted to spit in their faces. Instead, I just nodded and followed. The journey to the Calypso's Lament was a blur of cold corridors and silence so thick it pressed against my ears. The ship itself was a relic, a massive warship scarred by countless battles, its hull pocked with dents and burn marks, a testament to wars we'd forgotten. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Alien officers moved with precise purpose, their conversations a constant buzz of technical jargon and strategy. I was the outsider, the wild card, the unknown variable they didn't trust but couldn't ignore. Then came the briefing. They showed me the data, images, and videos of the enemy we faced. Dark shapes devouring stars, tearing planets apart with weapons that bent reality itself. The enemy had returned after centuries of silence, stronger and more ruthless than ever. The Concorde's forces were stretched thin. Entire fleets had been lost. They needed something new, something unpredictable. They needed humanity. But not just any humanity. They needed me. It was then they revealed the truth behind the monster nickname. During the last war, I had done things no one else had. I led missions that bordered on madness, using guerrilla tactics that scared even the most hardened soldiers. I survived impossible odds. I didn't just fight. I thrived in chaos. And in the last battle, I had faced the enemy head-on, alone, armed with nothing but a blade and a burning will. The footage was raw, brutal. Me, bloodied and laughing, cutting through creatures that should have killed me 10 times over. They saw in me the edge they'd lost, the primal fire. But it wasn't just the enemy they feared. It was what I represented, the raw, untamed spirit of Earth. the part of humanity that the Concord had tried to suppress, label as dangerous, and keep isolated. They called us primitive, unruly, too violent for the galaxy. But in the face of annihilation, it was that violence, that stubborn refusal to die, that made us vital. The rest of the night was a whirlwind of preparations. They fitted me with gear, weapons unlike anything I'd seen, and trained me in ways that felt both alien and familiar. They wanted to mold me into their soldier, but I made it clear I wouldn't be tamed. I was their monster, and I intended to prove that monsters survive. As the Calypso's lament broke orbit, I looked back at Earth, a blue and green jewel suspended in the void, beautiful and broken. I didn't know if I was coming back, but one thing was certain. The galaxy hadn't seen the last of Rincalder. The Calypso's lament was a tomb and a promise wrapped in steel. When I first stepped aboard, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me, the ghosts of battles past echoing in the hum of the ship's core. Every scar on its hull whispered stories of victory and defeat, of blood spilled in the void. Now that history was about to collide with the future, and I was its unwilling herald. The days that followed were a blur of drills, briefings, and cold routines designed to break you down and build you back up in their image. They wanted to forge me into a weapon, precise, obedient, efficient. But I was a firecracker in a box, wild and unpredictable. I learned quickly that the Concord didn't just fear the enemy. They feared what I symbolized, humanity's unyielding spirit, raw and unfiltered. In the mess hall, I found myself surrounded by a crew that looked like every species from the edges of the galaxy. Slender beings with skin like liquid mercury, towering figures whose muscles rippled like woven steel, eyes that could see through shadows. Yet, beneath the alien shells, I sensed the same pulse of fear and hope that beat inside me. They looked at me like I was a relic, a primitive savage dragged into a war they barely understood. I wore my scars like armor, but inside, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Then came the day we met fire with fire. The enemy, those nightmare creatures from the void, had finally found us. The Calypso's lament shuddered as alarms screamed through its corridors. The ship's AI, a voice both calm and cold, announced, "Contact. Hostile fleet detected. Brace for engagement." The bridge was a chaos of flashing lights and shouted orders. I stood at the back, arms crossed, heart pounding like a war drum. The commander, an alien named Threx, barked commands in rapid bursts. The crew moved like a single organism, practiced, precise, deadly. The enemy emerged from the darkness, vast tendrils of shadow twisting against the stars, ships that seemed to pulse with a hunger for destruction. They moved like storms, devouring everything in their path. The first volleys hit us like meteor storms. The hull groaned, and lights flickered. Men and aliens alike scrambled to their stations, firing back with everything they had. The Calypso's lament wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress. But even fortresses bleed. I was called to the armory. They handed me weapons that hummed with energy, pulse rifles that felt alive in my hands, blades that shimmered with a light I didn't understand. But I didn't need their fancy toys. I was trained for this, for the chaos, the blood, the grit of close combat. The order came through the comms. Boarding pods deployed. Enemy breach imminent. Prepare for counterattack. That was my cue. I grabbed my gear and followed the squad into the cold silence of space. The boarding pods ejected from the ship like death riding the void. The stars blurred as we sped toward the enemy vessel. A monstrous behemoth cloaked in darkness, its hull writhing with alien energy. The pod slammed into the enemy's airlock with a violent clang. The door hissed open, and we flooded inside. The ship was a nightmare made real. Corridors twisted and pulsed like living veins. The walls seemed to breathe, slick with something that looked like blood but shimmered with unnatural colors. Shadows moved just beyond the edge of vision. The air was thick with the scent of metal and decay. We moved fast, guns raised, eyes scanning every corner. The enemy wasn't just machines, they were alive, twisted by dark science and ancient hatred. Then they struck. From the shadows, creatures lunged, sinewy, monstrous beings with claws like scythes and eyes burning with malice. The firefight was brutal. I fought like a man possessed, every strike fueled by years of rage and survival. I saw comrades fall, heard their screams, felt the sting of alien claws tearing into flesh. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. In the chaos, I found myself face to face with one of the creatures, larger than the rest, its eyes glowing with a cruel intelligence. It snarled, a sound that shook my bones. I raised my blade, the energy humming through my arm like a second heartbeat. We clashed. The fight was brutal, a dance of fire and steel. The creature was fast, but I was faster. I remembered every lesson from my past, every scar, every loss. With a roar, I drove my blade through its heart. The creature howled and collapsed, dissolving into shadows. We secured the ship's core. The victory was hard-won, but it came at a cost. The Calypso's lament was battered, and so were we. Back on the bridge, Threx looked at me with a mix of grudging respect and disbelief. "You are not just a monster," he said quietly. "You are a weapon forged in fire." I didn't answer. I was too busy feeling the weight of what we just survived and what was still coming. That night, as the ship drifted through the void, I sat alone in the mess hall, staring into the bottom of a cup. The stars outside were cold and distant, but inside me, a fire burned brighter than ever. The galaxy might call me a monster, but monsters survive, and I was ready to prove it. The battle outside the hull was over, but inside the Calypso's lament, the war was just beginning. If the enemy beyond the stars was relentless, so too was the darkness that crept within the ship. A silence had settled after the chaos, the kind of silence that gnaws at your nerves, the quiet that hides whispers and secrets. And secrets were exactly what I was about to uncover. The day after our brutal boarding assault, the ship's atmosphere felt thick with unease. Everyone was on edge, wounded bodies patched up, tired eyes watching shadows, and an undercurrent of suspicion pulsing beneath the surface. The alien crew moved with practiced discipline, but I could see the cracks in their armor. They didn't trust me. I wasn't sure I trusted them either. The Concorde's intelligence officer, a tall, sharp-eyed being named Vexel, summoned me to the lower decks. Her skin shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting every color in the room. Her gaze was unreadable, like looking into a mirror covered with frost. "You have made an impression," she said, voice cool but not unkind. But impressions can be misleading. I didn't bother pretending I was anything other than what I was. "What do you want, Vexel?" She slid a datapad across the table. "We have a problem. Evidence suggests a saboteur is on board. Someone feeding information to the enemy." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. Saboteur. The idea that someone within our ranks was betraying us was worse than any enemy attack. It meant the Calypso's lament was vulnerable from the inside, and we had no idea who to trust. "Why come to me?" I asked. "Because you're different. Your methods, your instincts, they could uncover what others miss. We need you to find this traitor before it's too late." I looked at the datapad, scanning encrypted messages intercepted from unknown sources, coordinates, attack plans, supply routes. Someone was leaking everything. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The enemy's swift assaults, their uncanny knowledge of our moves, it wasn't just brute force. It was inside information. I began my investigation by retracing our steps during the last battle, reviewing security logs and footage. I questioned crew members quietly, their eyes flickering with fear or guilt, their voices tight with unspoken truths. Each question dug deeper, peeling back layers of trust and lies. The corridors I once moved through with purpose now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every whisper seemed to carry a double meaning. Late one night, I caught a glimpse of movement near the engineering bay, a place critical to the ship's survival, where the power core pulsed like a beating heart. I followed. The figure was quick, slender, and moved with a predator's grace. As I closed in, they vanished into a maintenance shaft, the kind of place where only someone familiar with the ship could navigate without leaving a trace. Days passed with no clear answers, but tension mounted. The crew's suspicion turned inward, fingers pointed, alliances fractured. The unity we fought so hard to build was crumbling. Then, the saboteur struck again. This time, they targeted the ship's communication systems. A blackout threw the Calypso's lament into chaos, cutting off contact with our fleet. Panic rippled through the crew like wildfire. I stood on the bridge, watching the screens flicker and die. Threx's voice was low but steady. "We are blind. The enemy could be anywhere." I knew the blackout wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. The enemy wasn't just outside our walls. They were inside. I doubled down on my investigation, piecing together clues, small inconsistencies in logs, strange access patterns, fleeting shadows and surveillance feeds. It felt like chasing a ghost, a phantom that slipped through the cracks with ease. One night, While reviewing data in the command center, I found it. A file, hidden deep in the ship's archives, encrypted with a code only the highest ranks used. It was a communication log, messages between someone on the Calypso's Lament and the enemy. My blood ran cold as I read the signature. It was a name I never expected. The traitor was one of our own. The revelation hit me harder than any enemy weapon. The person I trusted most, the one who had saved my life during the boarding assault, who had fought by my side through hell, was the saboteur. I confronted her in the quiet of the night, a narrow corridor bathed in the flickering light of emergency lamps. Her eyes met mine without fear. "Why?" I demanded. She smiled, bitter and cold. "Because this war is bigger than your ideals, Ren. Because sometimes survival means sacrifice." The word stung, but I didn't hesitate. The fight was swift, brutal, a clash of wills as much as weapons. I saw her hesitation, the flicker of doubt beneath her calm facade. And in that moment, I understood the true cost of this war. The saboteur was taken into custody, but the damage was done. Trust was shattered. The Calypso's Lament sailed on, but the enemy wasn't just out there in the void. They were inside us. That night, alone in my quarters, I stared at the stars beyond the viewport. The galaxy was darker than I'd ever imagined, but somewhere deep inside, a spark remained, and I was determined to keep it burning. The Calypso's Lament was no longer just a ship. It had become a crucible. Every day aboard was a test of endurance, loyalty, and sheer willpower. But nothing had prepared me for the breaking point, the moment when the weight of everything we were fighting for threatened to crush me completely. The aftermath of the betrayal still hung heavy in the air. The saboteur's arrest was a bitter victory, but it did little to mend the fractures her actions had caused. Whispers filled the corridors like poison, suspicion slicing through the crew like a blade. Trust, once the foundation of our unity, was now a fragile illusion. I tried to push the doubts aside, focusing on the mission ahead. Our orders were clear: intercept the enemy convoy transporting weapons that could turn the tide of war. Intelligence suggested they were vulnerable, but every operation carried the risk of ambush. I stood on the bridge, staring out into the endless void, the stars cold and indifferent. The weight of command pressed down on me, heavier than any armor. "Ren, you're needed in the war room." Threx's voice cut through the silence, sharp and urgent. I followed him through the maze of corridors, my mind racing. The war room was packed with officers from every corner of the galaxy, their faces etched with tension. "Reports indicate the convoy is closer than expected," Threx briefed. "Our sensors picked up an anomaly, an unknown vessel trailing them. It's fast, and it's staying just out of range. We suspect it's a decoy, meant to lure us into a trap." A trap? I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The enemy was playing a game of shadows, and we were the pawns. "Prepare the strike teams," Threx ordered. We hit them hard and fast. No mistakes. Back in my quarters, I gathered my gear, the familiar weight of my pulse rifle grounding me. But this time, the weapon felt heavier, not because of its physical mass, but the burden of what it represented. The lives depending on me, the stakes higher than ever. As the Calypso's Lament closed in on the target, I joined my squad in the launch bay. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, a silent storm before the storm. The pods detached from the ship, hurtling through the void towards the enemy convoy. Stars streaked past in blurs of light, and my heart pounded in rhythm with the engines. The moment we breached the convoy's perimeter, chaos erupted. Enemy ships swarmed around us like angry wasps, their weapons blazing. Explosions painted the darkness in bursts of fire and metal. Our mission was clear: disable the convoy's flagship and seize the weapon caches. We landed on the enemy ship's hull, the metallic surface vibrating beneath our boots. The airlock hissed open, revealing a labyrinth of corridors and chambers. The smell of burnt ozone and something more sinister, the scent of desperation. We moved cautiously, every shadow a potential threat. The enemy was everywhere, lurking and striking with deadly precision. Then, the trap sprung. Reinforcements poured in from hidden compartments, cutting off our retreat. The enemy had anticipated our every move. Trapped and outnumbered, we fought like cornered beasts. The battle was savage. Gunfire echoed, blades clashed, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. In the heat of combat, I found myself separated from my squad. Alone in the twisting corridors, I faced a squad of enemy soldiers closing in. The fight was brutal. I relied on every ounce of training, every instinct honed over years of battle. But the enemy was relentless, their weapons advanced and their tactics ruthless. Just when I thought I was done, a flash of movement caught my eye. A figure, human, appeared, firing with deadly accuracy. They covered my retreat, their face obscured by a helmet. Together, we broke through the enemy lines and made our way back to the pods. As we reached the launch bay, I finally saw who my savior was. A woman, fierce and determined, eyes blazing with the same fire I knew well. "Thanks," I gasped, still catching my breath. She nodded. "We don't have much time." The pods launched, racing away from the enemy ship as it erupted in flames behind us. The mission was a success, but the cost was clear. Back on the Calypso's Lament, the crew tended to the wounded and counted the dead. The scars of battle were fresh, but so was the resolve. That night, I sat alone on the observation deck, staring out into the endless stars. The weight of command was heavier than ever, and the fractures within our crew felt like wounds that might never heal. But amidst the darkness, I found a flicker of hope in the bravery of my squad, in the fierce spirit of my mysterious savior, and in the unbreakable will that defined humanity. The war was far from over, and I was ready for whatever came next. The Calypso's Lament was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where we could regroup, mend our wounds, and steel ourselves for the battles yet to come. But beneath the gleaming hull and humming machinery, something darker was stirring. Shadows of doubt were creeping through the crew like a slow poison, and I could feel the weight of suspicion settling like a fog on every conversation, every glance, every decision. The day after the convoy assault, the ship was eerily quiet. The battle had left its mark: shattered panels, scorched floors, and the hollow eyes of those who had survived. The sick bay was overflowing, and every face I passed wore the strain of exhaustion and fear. But it wasn't just physical wounds that haunted us. It was the question hanging over us all: who could we really trust? I found myself wandering the lower decks, drawn to the mess hall where the crew usually gathered. Today, the atmosphere was tense, the usual camaraderie replaced by hushed conversations and sidelong glances. Rin called out Sela, one of the medics, her voice low. She approached me, her eyes filled with worry. "Have you heard anything about the traitor? People are scared." I nodded, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "We're doing everything we can. We'll find them." She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There's talk about you, you know. Some think you're hiding something, that you're not fully on our side." Her words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't surprised. Suspicion was a natural reaction after betrayal, but it still stung. I had to remind myself why I was here. Not just to fight the enemy, but to hold us together. Later, I met with Threx in his quarters. The towering warrior sat hunched over a holographic map, lines of strategy and movement glowing in the dim light. "We're losing more than just ships and soldiers," he said without looking up. "We're losing faith in each other." "I know," I replied. "And if that continues, it could be the death of us." He finally met my gaze, the fierce determination in his eyes unwavering. "Then we need to find the source. The traitor's not just leaking information, they're poisoning our unity. We have to root them out before it's too late." That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the saboteur's cold smile haunted me, a reminder of how thin the line between friend and foe really was. I thought about my mysterious savior from the convoy assault, her fierce eyes and quiet strength. There was something about her I couldn't shake. The next day, I requested access to the ship's surveillance archives. I needed to see everything, every movement, every conversation that might hold a clue. Hours turned into days as I pored over footage, tracing patterns, noting discrepancies. The saboteur had been careful, but even the most careful left traces. Then, I found it. A brief meeting in a seldom-used corridor, a whispered conversation between two crew members. One was the woman who saved me, the same fierce stranger. The other, a shadowy figure from the ship's command staff. My heart pounded. Could she be involved? Was she working for the enemy? I confronted her quietly in the hydroponics bay, where the air was thick with the scent of growing things and artificial sunlight. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" I asked. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Because the truth isn't simple, and because I'm not sure who I can trust." Her name was Kayla, and she was a covert operative sent by a faction within the Alliance to uncover a conspiracy that threatened the entire galaxy. The saboteur was just the tip of the iceberg. Something far larger and more dangerous was unfolding. I wanted to believe her, but trust was fragile, and every word felt like a double-edged sword. Kayla shared what she knew, whispers of a secret alliance between the enemy and rogue elements within our own ranks, plans to overthrow the current order and seize power for themselves. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant the war was not just against an external enemy, but a civil war brewing within our own. Together, we began a quiet investigation, careful not to alert those who might be watching. We dug deeper into ship logs, intercepted encrypted messages, and questioned trusted officers in hushed tones. But the deeper we delved, the more dangerous it became. Threats came in the form of subtle warnings, sabotaged equipment, coded messages slipped under doors, a shadow lurking just out of sight. One night, as I worked late in the command center, the power flickered and went out. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows, and for a moment, the ship felt like a tomb. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I spun around, pulse racing, but no one was there. Kayla's voice came through my comm. "Be careful, Ren. They're watching." That was the moment I realized. The breaking point wasn't just about trust or betrayal. It was about survival of our crew, our mission, and perhaps humanity itself. The war outside was brutal, but the war inside was merciless. And as the shadows closed in, I knew I had to become more than a soldier or a leader. I had to become the spark that could ignite hope in the darkest night. Because if I failed, the Calypso's lament and everything we stood for would be lost. The fire started in the dead of night. It wasn't the kind of fire you expect, not a blazing inferno with roaring flames that you can see from across a battlefield. No, this was a quiet, insidious thing, a spark that grew unnoticed, flickering in the bowels of the Calypso's lament, threatening to consume everything we'd fought so hard to protect. I was jolted awake by the alarm, a shrill, piercing wail that tore through the stillness of the ship like a warning scream. My heart hammered in my chest as I threw off the thin blanket and scrambled out of my bunk. "Fire in Sector 4 Alpha," the intercom crackled. "All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." The corridors were already filling with smoke when I reached the hallway. The acrid stench burned my throat and eyes, making every breath a struggle. I grabbed my pulse rifle and sprinted towards the fire teams assembling near the hatchways. My squad was scattered, some still recovering from the convoy assault, others on patrol. But the flames didn't care. They devoured everything indiscriminately. "Ren." Kayla's voice cut through the chaos. She was already suited up, her face grim and determined beneath the helmet's visor. "We need to contain the fire before it reaches the engine room," she said. "If that goes up, we're all dead." The engine room was the heart of the Calypso's lament. Without it, we were drifting, a tomb lost in the stars. We moved quickly, battling the smoke and heat as we approached the source. Flames licked the walls, spreading faster than anyone expected. The fire suppression systems were offline, sabotaged. My fists clenched around the rifle. The saboteur was still with us. "Somewhere. Split up," Kayla ordered. "We'll search for survivors and look for any signs of who did this." I took the left corridor, the heat growing unbearable. The walls were blistering, the floor slick with melting wiring and fuel. In the flickering light, I saw a movement. A figure collapsed against the bulkhead, coughing and choking on the smoke. "Hold on," I shouted, dropping to my knees. I dragged the crewman out of the smoke-filled hallway just before the ceiling above us collapsed in a shower of sparks. He gasped, eyes wide with terror. It's everywhere. They want us to die." Who's behind this?" I pressed, helping him to his feet. He shook his head, fear making his words stumble. "I don't know, but someone's working against us from inside. Someone with access. Someone who knows the ship better than any of us." The words hit hard, but I already knew that. The enemy wasn't just out there in the cold void. It was here, inside our own ranks. As we regrouped near the containment bulkhead, Kayla approached, her expression grim. "We found evidence of a coordinated attack," she said. "Not just sabotage, but an attempt to cripple the Calypso's lament and leave us stranded." The implications were terrifying. Stranded in hostile space, surrounded by enemies and traitors, with no way home. Who would do this? I demanded. Kayla's eyes darkened. Someone with a plan to seize control. Someone who wants to see the Alliance fall. That night, the ship's mood was shattered. The fire had been contained, but the damage was done. We lost not only systems and supplies, but also lives. In the aftermath, I found myself on the observation deck again, staring into the stars. The fire's orange glow still haunted my mind, a reminder of how close we were to losing everything. Kayla joined me quietly, her presence steady and reassuring. "We have to be smarter," she said, "more vigilant. The saboteur is bold, but they're also desperate. That means they're making mistakes." I nodded, the weight of leadership settling heavily on my shoulders. "We'll find them. And when we do, they'll regret ever stepping aboard this ship." But as the days wore on, the cracks in our crew's unity grew wider. Fear bred paranoia, and paranoia bred division. Accusations flew like shrapnel. Friends turned wary. Strangers eyed each other with suspicion. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. And through it all, I struggled to hold on to the one thing that kept me going. Hope. Hope that humanity's fire, our stubborn refusal to be extinguished, would burn brighter than the darkness closing in. Because in the end, that's what made us human. There's a point in every crisis when things stop being just about survival, when fear and desperation start to fracture the very bonds that hold a group together. On the Calypso's lament, that point came fast and brutal. The fire had been fought off, but its aftermath was a slow-burning disaster. Systems were failing, resources were stretched thin, and trust, the fragile glue holding us together, was splintering like dry wood under pressure. It wasn't just the enemy pressing from outside anymore. It was the enemy within. I woke that morning with a headache pounding behind my eyes. The ship's artificial gravity hummed faintly, a constant reminder that, despite all we'd lost, we were still alive, still moving through the endless void. I forced myself out of the cramped quarters and made my way to the command center. The corridor was thick with tension. Crew members whispered in clusters, eyes darting nervously, hands clenched on weapons or data pads. The weight of suspicion hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. "Run!" A voice called softly from the shadows. It was Jorin, the ship's communications officer. His usually steady demeanor was frayed. I shadowed with exhaustion. "Something you want to share, Jorin?" I asked, stepping closer. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's talk. The crew's breaking down. People are accusing each other of sabotage, betrayal, even treason. It's only a matter of time before it turns violent." I sighed, the crushing responsibility settling like armor around my chest. "We can't afford to fall apart. Not now. We have to find a way to hold them together." Jorin nodded grimly. Easier said than done. The command center was a hive of activity. Holographic maps glowed against the walls. Flickering data streams raced across consoles, and officers barked orders, trying to maintain control. I joined Kayla and Threx at the strategy table. The three of us were the core of the leadership, bound by duty and the fragile trust we'd managed to build. "We're losing control," Kayla said, voice tight. "Our informants report growing unrest. The saboteur's still at large, and whoever it is, they're exploiting the fear, using it like a weapon." Threx slammed his fist on the table. "Then we find them before it's too late. Root them out and burn the rot from the ship." I raised a hand to calm him. "Violence will only make things worse. We need evidence, clear proof. Otherwise, we risk turning on each other, and that's exactly what the saboteur wants." Kayla nodded, but I saw the doubt flicker in her eyes. "We're running out of time." Days passed in a haze of tension. Every meeting, every patrol, every conversation was shadowed by suspicion. I found myself questioning faces I'd once trusted without hesitation. One evening, I was summoned to the brig. The commander there, a stern woman named Lena, met me with a grave expression. "We have a situation," she said. "A crew member was caught attempting to tamper with the ship's life support systems." My heart sank. "Who?" She handed me a data chip. "Name's Rel. Engineer. Quiet. Kept to himself. But he was found with tools and coded access logs." I reviewed the logs. There was no doubt Rel had been sabotaging critical systems, risking all our lives. I went to the brig to confront him. Rel looked up, eyes defiant but weary. "You don't understand. I'm not the enemy." "Then who?" I asked, voice low. "Why destroy the ship we all depend on?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Because the real threat isn't out there in space. It's inside, and if we don't expose it, we're all doomed." I pressed for names, but he only shook his head. "I can't say more. They're watching. They're everywhere." That night, I couldn't sleep. The line between friend and foe blurred beyond recognition. The crew was fracturing, paranoia spreading like wildfire. The next morning, I convened an emergency council with Kayla, Threx, and Lena. "We need to strengthen internal security," Lena urged. "Tighter patrols, restricted access, background checks on everyone." Kayla added, "And we need to address the crew openly, honestly. If we let fear fester in silence, it'll destroy us faster than any enemy. I agreed, but the thought scared me. Exposing the truth risked panic. Concealing it risked chaos. We decided on a bold move, a ship-wide assembly. Every crew member, every rank, would gather to hear what we knew and what we were doing about it. The assembly hall was packed. Faces turned toward me, a sea of hope, fear, and exhaustion. I stood before them, heart pounding but voice steady. We're facing threats on two fronts, I began. Outside, enemies seek to destroy us. Inside, there are those who would betray us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces hardened in anger, others softened in sadness. We will find the saboteur, I continued. But more importantly, we will stand together. Because that unity, our humanity, is our greatest weapon. I looked at Kayla and Threx, seeing the flicker of resolve in their eyes. This was our fracture line. The moment we either broke apart or forged something stronger. After the assembly, I found myself alone in the observation deck once more. The stars seemed indifferent, cold pinpricks in the vast darkness. Kayla joined me quietly. You did well, she said softly. But the real fight is just beginning. I nodded. I know. And we have to be ready. Not just to fight the enemy out there, but the shadows within. Because in the cold void of space, sometimes the hardest battle is the one inside your own crew and your own heart. The tension aboard the Calypso's Lament was a living thing, a restless beast prowling the corridors, gnawing at the nerves of every soul aboard. After the assembly, the fragile unity we'd fought so hard to preserve began to crack wider. Shadows stretched long in the flickering emergency lights, and secrets long buried clawed their way to the surface. I woke to the insistent buzz of my comm unit, a message flagged urgent. It was Kayla. Meet me in the command center. Now, the gravity of the summons set my pulse racing as I grabbed my gear and raced through the twisting halls. The ship felt colder, emptier, or maybe it was just the weight of what we were about to face. Kayla was pacing when I arrived, her expression sharp, eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and resolve. We found something, she said without preamble. Data from Rel's comms logs. Someone's been communicating with him, covertly, off the ship. Who? I asked, heart pounding. She tapped a holographic display, and a face flickered into view. A man with cold eyes and a calculating smile, Commander Valen. Valen? I breathed. He's with the Alliance fleet. Why would he be involved in sabotage? Kayla's gaze was hard. Because this isn't just about the Calypso's Lament. It's bigger, much bigger. We worked through the night, tracing the encrypted transmissions, decoding fragments of intercepted messages. It was a web of conspiracy stretching beyond the ship, into the darkest corners of the Alliance command. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that the sabotage was part of a coup attempt, an effort by rogue elements within the fleet to seize power by crippling key vessels and sowing chaos. But why target us? Why risk such a desperate gamble? Because the Calypso's Lament wasn't just any ship. We carried something valuable, something they wanted to control. A prototype technology capable of changing the balance of power in the galaxy. A weapon of unimaginable potential, hidden deep in the ship's vaults. I felt the weight of that secret pressing down on me. We weren't just fighting for survival. We were guardians of a fragile hope. Kayla's voice broke through my thoughts. We need to move fast. If Valen knows we're onto him, he'll come after us. The ship's corridors thrummed with activity as we prepared for what came next. We tightened security, secured the vaults, and doubled patrols. But the fractures among the crew were widening. Accusations flew freely. Old friendships strained under the weight of distrust. In the mess hall, whispers turned to open confrontations. I found myself mediating fights between crew members who once fought side by side. One evening, I sat across from Joe Wren, the communications officer, his usual calm shattered by exhaustion and fear. They're everywhere, he said quietly. Watching, listening. We can't trust anyone. I reached across the table, gripping his hand. We have to. That's the only way we survive. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Trust was a fragile thread stretched thin by shadows and secrets. Then came the breach. A security alert blared through the ship. Unauthorized access detected in the vault sector. Kayla and I raced to the scene, weapons drawn. The corridors were eerily silent, the only sound our footsteps echoing off cold metal. We found the vault's outer door ajar, the locking mechanisms damaged. Inside, the prototype tech was gone. My heart sank. Years of work, gone in minutes. We've been compromised, Kayla said, voice tight with rage. and whoever took it is still on the ship. The chase began. We hunted through the labyrinthine passages, following traces of tampered systems and smuggled data. Every corner held potential danger, every shadow a threat. Finally, we cornered a figure in the cargo hold, a low-ranking officer named Ceres, eyes wide with desperation. He confessed, coerced by threats to his family, forced to betray us to protect them. Valen's plan runs deeper, Ceres warned. They're not just after the tech. They want control of the entire fleet. Chaos is their weapon. Kayla's fists clenched. Then we have to stop them before it's too late. Back on the bridge, I stared out into the star-speckled void, the stolen tech's absence a gnawing ache. The Calypso's lament was wounded, but not broken. We fight because we must, I said quietly. Because our fire burns brighter than their shadows. Kayla nodded beside me. And because we believe in something worth fighting for. In the heart of the void, among fractured loyalties and unseen enemies, humanity still held the line. Some say the stars are cold, that in the vacuum of space, even fire loses its fury. But I've seen otherwise. I've seen the heat of defiance burn hotter than any sun. And in this chapter, I lived it. The alarms didn't stop for 2 full minutes. 211 seconds of blinking crimson, of klaxons screaming like wounded beasts, of my pulse hammering behind my eyes. I was in the command center when the world shifted. Enemy fleet incoming, Kayla announced, her voice steely even as her eyes darted across the data feed. Valen's ships, 4 destroyers, 1 carrier. Jorin swore under his breath. They're jamming our long-range comms. We can't warn the rest of the fleet. They're here to finish us, Threx growled, and make sure no one knows what happened. They want the tech, I said quietly. But more than that, they want the narrative. If we disappear in silence, they can claim we defected, got lost, or broke down. Kayla looked at me, expression unreadable. So what do we do, Captain? I let the title settle on my shoulders like an old coat. Worn, familiar, heavy. We fight. A ripple of silence passed over the room. Then, like a wind-catching flame, it ignited. Threx pounded a fist on the console. Damn right we do. Battle stations, Kayla barked. Prepare all decks. Lock down engineering. Bring the prototype online, but do not activate it until I give the order. I turned to Jorin. Patch internal comms. I want the entire crew listening. He gave me a thumbs up, and I stepped to the broadcast podium. A dozen cameras blinked red. 100 pairs of ears leaned in. Thousands of hearts waited. This is Commander Rin. I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But we are not broken. We are not alone. You've trained for this. You've bled for this. You've earned the right to stand your ground. I looked into the lens and saw them. Faces I knew. People I'd fought beside, laughed with, nearly died for. They think they can silence us, that they can erase us. But we are the spark in the dark. We are the flame that refuses to go out. I hit the comm cutoff. Silence returned, not empty, but charged. We were ready. The Calypso's lament spun on its axis, maneuvering to face the enemy. Its wounded hull groaned, but its heart, our heart, beat strong. Outside, Valen's fleet dropped from warp like wolves into a sheepfold. Gleaming steel monstrosities surrounded us, their hulls bristling with weapons. Their confidence radiated in every formation. They didn't expect a fight. They expected surrender. We gave them fire instead. Kayla opened with a full salvo from our dorsal turrets, shattering one of the lead destroyer's shields. Threx jammed their scanning systems, and our engineers flooded the comm grid with static, hiding our frequencies. But we were one ship against many. Our shields flared and buckled under a barrage of return fire. The deck shuddered beneath my feet. Starboard reactor hit, Jorin shouted. Auxiliary power rerouting. Hold the line, I growled. Where's the prototype? In position, Kayla said. Ready on your mark. I looked at her. If we use it, there's no going back. We cross a line. We crossed it when they tried to assassinate their own fleet, she snapped. We use it or we die. The prototype was called Vanifier, a directed dark energy plasma weapon, capable of warping matter and disrupting enemy ship cores at a quantum level. Still experimental. Never tested in combat. I nodded. Fire it. From deep within the ship, I felt the pulse. Not sound, not vibration, but gravity. A strange pressure that made my bones ache. Then, through the viewports, a spear of black fire lanced from our underbelly. It didn't look real. It bent the stars around it, twisted light, made space itself shudder. It struck the enemy carrier dead center. For a moment, nothing. Then, silence. And then the carrier folded in on itself, sucked into a singularity no larger than a coin before vanishing in a flash of ultraviolet light. The crew stared in stunned awe. Joran whispered, "Holy hell." Kayla exhaled slowly. Confirmed kill. The rest of Valen's fleet faltered. You could see it in their formations. Fear, doubt, disbelief. I knew what came next. They'll try to board, I said. They can't win from a distance anymore. They'll want the weapon intact. Sure enough, seconds later, proximity alarms screamed. Dropships inbound. Frex bared his teeth. Let them come. We braced for impact. Dropships lashed onto our hull, magnetic clamps hissing. Boarding sirens wailed as our internal defenses snapped into place. And then the real fight began. I led the first team personally, pulse rifle in hand, armor sealed. Kayla at my side. We met the enemy in the central corridor, black-armored Marines pouring in like a tide. They were fast, trained, and ruthless, but they weren't us. We fought like cornered lions. Our Marines used every trick, every angle. Threx were routed power to pressure doors, sealing off choke points and venting oxygen from breached decks. I killed 3 before my rifle overheated, switched to pistol, then blade. It was chaos. Metal on metal, boots on blood-slick floors, screams and shouts, and the crack of stun grenades. And in the middle of it all, I saw him, Valen. He strode through the battle in advanced armor, a plasma halberd crackling in his hands. His helmet peeled back as he saw me. "Rin," he said, smiling like we were old friends, still clinging to illusions of loyalty, still hiding behind treachery. I shot back. He lunged. We fought in the narrow corridor, his halberd against my blade, our weapons sparking as they met again and again. He was stronger, but I was faster and more desperate. "This isn't about power," I shouted. "You're tearing apart everything we built." "No," he growled. "I'm building something better, stronger, order without weakness. You'd understand if you weren't so sentimental." I feinted left and stabbed low. The blade pierced a weak spot under his rib. He gasped, stumbled. Kayla tackled him from the side and drove her sidearm into his helmet. 2 shots, point blank. The light in his eyes faded. Valen fell. We stood over his corpse, panting, bloodied, stunned. "It's over," Kayla said. "No," I said quietly. "It's just beginning." With Valen gone and the boarding party scattered, the remnants of his fleet fell back. One tried to escape. We disabled its engines. Another self-destructed before we could board. And then, silence returned. We spent hours combing the ship, sealing breaches, treating the wounded. Over 50 dead, twice as many injured. But we'd won. Later, in the observation deck, Kayla and I stood together, watching the stars. "We survived," she said softly. "Against all odds." "Not just survived," I said. "We stood up. We proved that humanity's strength isn't in numbers or weapons." I looked at her. "It's in our stubborn refusal to surrender, in our ability to unite when everything tries to tear us apart." She smiled faintly. "What now?" "We report what happened, expose the conspiracy, and we rebuild. One ship, one crew, one victory at a time." Behind us, the lights of the Calypso's lament flickered back to full power. The engines hummed. The scars remained, but the heart beat on. This was more than survival. This was a message to every shadow that lurked in the void, to every enemy who underestimated us. We are human. We endure. And when you come for us, we burn brighter than you ever dreamed.